Okay, welcome to the deep dive. We're jumping straight in today.
Yeah.
We've got some source material here, specifically looking at excerpts from an article in the Indian Express.
That's right. And our goal today is really to, unpack this together. We want to pull out the key points, understand the different perspectives the source
To
presents.
figure out what it all actually means.
Exactly. Especially since it deals with some pretty charged claims about South Africa.
Yeah, absolutely. We're using this article to fact check some of those claims. And just to be clear for everyone listening, our focus is strictly on what the source reports.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sensitive topic, touches on politics, history. So we're not here to endorse any viewpoint in the article, just explore the information provided.
And it's interesting, the article brings in so many different layers, doesn't it? It's not just one simple claim.
No, not at all.
You've got history, international relations, crime stats, land reform, even cultural stuff like songs.
Right. Which is why it's such a good example of how complex these global issues can get.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive in. The article starts by kind of setting the stage right. Where did this specific international focus come from?
Well, the source points directly to claims made by former U.S. President Donald Trump.
Okay.
He asserted that white farmers in South Africa were victors of, and this is the specific term he used according to the source, genocide.
And the article details actions linked to that claim.
It does. It mentions Trump announcing that Afrikaners could potentially get refugee status in the U.S.
Right.
And it even reports that U.S. officials were allowed to process applications there, and that nearly 60 people did travel to the U.S. based on this.
Wow. And there was that White House meeting mentioned.
Yes, a meeting between Trump and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. The source describes it as quite high profile, even mentions Elon Musk being there, along with journalists.
Sounds like it might have been tense.
The article suggests it was confrontational, yes. The claims were reportedly brought up directly.
Okay, before we get too deep into the genocide claim itself, the article takes a step back. It talks about who the Afrikaners are. Why is that history lesson important here?
Oh, it's absolute crucial context. The source, drawing on South African history online, explains they're mainly descended from Dutch, German, and French settlers going way back to the mid-17th century.
And they're also known as Boers?
Yes, meaning farmers. They developed their own language. Afrikaans, a really distinct identity.
And their role during apartheid. That's obviously key.
Massively important. The article is clear. From 1948 onwards, Afrikaner-led governments held enormous power. And they enforced apartheid, legal racial segregation, systematic oppression of Black South Africans. That history casts a long shadow over everything, especially debates about land and power.
Which the article notes ended, formally at least, in 1994 with Nelson Mandela and the ANC. So what about today? What does the source say about their population size now?
The article states they make up about 4% of South Africa's population, which is over 60 million total. So numerically, that's over 2.5 million people. Just gives you a sense of scale.
Right. Okay, so let's get back to that central claim. Genocide. How does the Indian Express article handle that term directly?
Well, it reports Trump's language, brutally killed, land confiscated, and calling it genocide. But, and this is a really critical point the source makes immediately, that term genocide is not used by any major human rights bodies, not by international institutions, not even by political parties within South Africa, including those representing the white community.
That's a huge distinction. Does the article explain why the term is seen as inaccurate? Maybe define genocide?
It does. It points out the specific legal and historical meaning as systematic attempts to annihilate a group based on race, ethnicity, and so on. By putting that definition next to the reporting, the source strongly implies the situation in South Africa, however serious the crime issues are, doesn't meet that specific, very high threshold according to mainstream analysis.
Got it. And that White House meeting,
Yeah.
you said Trump showed videos. What did the source say happened there?
Yeah, reportedly showed President Ramaphosa videos claimed as proof. One was apparently of an opposition politician, Julius Malema, singing that controversial song, Shoot the Boer.
Okay.
Ramaphosa's response, according to the article, that such songs are part of free expression, and crucially, that crime is a problem affecting all races in South Africa.
And there was another specific video mentioned, something about burial sites.
Yes, that one sounded quite dramatic. Trump reportedly claimed it showed over 1,000 burial sites for white farmers, this road lined with crosses.
Wow. But the source fact-checked that.
Well, the source cites a New York Times analysis that looked into it. And according to that analysis, reported in the article, the footage was actually from a memorial procession in September 2020.
Okay.
It was for one murdered farming couple near a town called Newcastle. The crosses were temporary, put there for the event, and taken down afterwards.
So a specific event, not evidence of mass burials. That detail from the source really changes the interpretation.
Completely.
So if we boil it down, based on the source's reporting from South African authorities and courts, are white South Africans being systematically targeted for annihilation?
The short answer presented in the article is no.
Okay. What about the crime statistics? Because those often come up. How does the article handle the numbers?
It's tricky. As the article notes, South Africa doesn't release official crime stats broken down by race, so direct comparisons are hard.
But it does give some specific figures.
It does. For a recent period, October to December 2024, it reports nearly 7,000 murders nationally, 6,953 to be exact.
A huge number overall.
Yeah.
And farm attacks within that.
Out of those nearly 7,000 murders, the article states 12 occurred in farm attacks during that specific 3-month period.
12. Out of almost 7,000. That really provides scale.
It does.
Mhm.
And the source even breaks down those 12 deaths. It says 1 was a farmer, 5 were farm dwellers, and 4 were employees. So not exclusively farmers, and a tiny fraction of the total homicides.
The article also mentioned a judge's ruling.
Yes, February 2025. A South African judge, during a case involving a white supremacist group's inheritance, apparently dismissed the whole idea of a white genocide, called it clearly imagined and not real, according to the source.
Strong words from the judiciary there. Okay, let's shift focus slightly. How is this whole issue discussed inside South Africa, according to the article? What about their own political parties?
Again, the article emphasizes that no major party is claiming genocide. It specifically mentions the Freedom Front Plus, which is right-wing and represents many Afrikaners, and the main opposition, the Democratic Alliance. Neither uses the term.
And President Ramaphosa himself.
The article quotes him calling the allegations completely false. It also includes his reported view that maybe some people leaving are finding it hard to adjust to the post-apartheid constitutional changes.
But the article doesn't just dismiss the concerns of some Afrikaners, does it?
No, it acknowledges that concern exists. It cites a BBC report saying about 70,000 Afrikaners showed interest in relocating to the U.S. in 2025.
Which sounds like a lot, but...
But the article adds the context. It's still a small fraction of the total 2.5 million plus Afrikaner population.
And it also mentions voices within the community encouraging people not to leave.
Yes, it points to groups like Solidarity, a lobby group publishing articles urging people to stay, and it includes that quote from the FF Plus leader, Corne Mulder, in Parliament.
What was that again?
He said, according to the source, "We are bound to Africa and will build a future for ourselves and our children here," which shows a very different perspective from within that community.
Right. Now, these claims often get tangled up with other hot-button issues in South Africa. The article brings up land reform. What's the background there?
The source explains it stems directly from the apartheid legacy, where Black South Africans were systematically stripped of their land. It's a huge historical injustice.
And there's a new law trying to address that.
Yes, signed by Ramaphosa this January. But as the article reports, it's controversial. The DA, for example, argues it undermines property rights, and they plan to challenge it in court.
This is where Elon Musk comes in again, right?
Yeah, the source mentions him accusing South Africa of racist ownership laws related to his company, Starlink.
But the article gives the other side of that story.
It does. It includes the clarification from ICASA, the telecoms regulator. They stated Starlink actually never submitted a license application.
Yes.
And the article explains the context. South African law requires 30% ownership by historically disadvantaged groups for certain licenses. This is part of broader efforts to redress apartheid-era economic exclusion. So the regulator's perspective, reported in the source, paints a different picture than just racist laws.
Fascinating detail. Another really divisive element the article tackles, that song Shoot the Boer.
Yeah, sung by EFF leader Julius Malema. It's hugely contentious. Afrikaner groups have tried to get it banned, arguing it incites violence.
But there was a court ruling on it.
Correct. The article reports South Africa's Supreme Court of Appeal ruled against banning it.
Why?
Their reasoning, as reported, was that the lyrics originate from the anti-apartheid struggle. And in the context of political protest today, a reasonably well-informed person wouldn't take it as a literal instruction to kill, but as provocative political expression, a sort of historical echo used politically.
A very complex legal interpretation there, highlighted by the source. Okay, finally, the article touches on the broader issue. Is there racial discrimination against white South Africans today?
The source presents a nuanced picture. It states that, yes, white South Africans as a group remain economically privileged compared to the black majority, a legacy of apartheid. But it also says some policies designed to correct historical imbalances have drawn criticism from within the white community.
Like the Employment Equity Act.
Exactly. The source explains this act sets diversity targets for companies. Sometimes jobs are reserved for specific racial groups to improve representation, trying to undo past exclusion.
And the criticism.
Critics, including the DA, argue these laws might marginalize some qualified people or even enable corruption. That's the counter-argument reported in the source.
Does the article give a concrete example?
It did. A recent job ad from the sports ministry reserved posts for colored, Asian, and white applicants. This caused a backlash. But the minister, Gayton McKenzie, defended it as necessary to balance his department's demographics according to the article.
And crucially, the source provides a statistic that puts these equity policies into context.
Yes, data from the Commission for Employment Equity. It states white South Africans hold 62.1% of top management jobs, despite being only 7.7% of the economically active population.
Wow, 62% of top jobs for less than 8% of the workforce.
That specific data point, included in the source, really highlights the scale of the economic disparity these policies are trying, however controversially, to address.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize all this. We've gone through the claims, the history, the data, the court rulings, the internal debates. What's the main takeaway from this Indian Express article?
Well, the court finding reported is pretty clear. The specific claim of white genocide, as framed internationally, isn't backed up by the data, court decisions, or mainstream political views within South Africa presented in the source.
But the article absolutely shows South Africa is dealing with some major complex issues.
Definitely. It doesn't gloss over that. Land reform, deep economic inequality, how to achieve employment equity fairly. These are huge, ongoing struggles rooted in the apartheid past. The article reports on these real, often divisive debates happening inside the country.
But it distinguishes these debates from the specific claim of genocide.
Exactly. The source presents them as separate, though sometimes related, issues.
So for you listening, especially if you're trying to get a handle on complex global topics, maybe for current affairs study or just general understanding.
Yeah, this deep dive really shows you can't just take a headline claim at face value. You have to dig into the details the source provides. Look at the history, like apartheid's legacy. Examine the specific numbers, crime stats, employment figures, and importantly, understand the different viewpoints and debates within the country itself, which this article tried to do.
It's a powerful reminder of how history, politics, and data can be framed and contested, both locally and globally.
Definitely food for thought there.
And just to reiterate, all the information we've discussed today was drawn from that article published in the Indian Express. So if you found this deep dive useful, or if you have more questions prompted by what we've discussed from this source, please do like and subscribe.
Yeah, and drop a comment below. We'd genuinely like to hear what points from this article resonated most, or what aspects you found particularly interesting or challenging.